Lecture 9, Orchestral Eminence, Classical and Romantic Eras, 1750 to 1910. While vocal music was at the center of medieval Renaissance and Baroque musical traditions, it is sound to recognize instrumental music began in those eras. The developed through the Baroque era, mostly playing a supportive role for vocal and theatrical works, such as masses, oratorios, and operas. Additionally, composers from the classical era to today compose vocal music, but especially in the classical and romantic eras, instrumental music becomes a significant focus. More independent instrumental works existed in the earlier eras, such as medieval dances, which would later develop into suites, collections of dances such as Renaissance composer Tilman Susado's La Danserie, which gathered 60 dances written for 4 instruments in 1551. In the Baroque, in addition to suites, composers established new forms such as a concerto and sonata, which would be refined in the classical era, 1750 to 1820. It is estimated that of today's orchestra repertoire, roughly 20 to 30% of what is performed was written in the classical era. Baroque composers Arcangelo Corelli and Antonio Vivaldi were known for the growth of the concerto, which accentuates contrast, such as between a soloist and a larger orchestra, and gradually standardized the 3-movement concerto, a fast movement followed by a slow movement, and concluding with a fast movement. These movements often utilize then-known dance forms. However, the classical era refinement of the concerto genre included featuring the sonato allegro form into the first movement, emphasizing melodic development, harmonic simplicity, and balancing the dialogue between the soloist and the orchestra. Classical composers diverged from previous eras in their emphasis on ideals of simplicity, rationality, order, and restraint, ideals that emerged from the Enlightenment, pursuing the structure and logic of Isaac Newton's science. But perhaps defying the era's restraint, classical composers such as Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, 1756 to 1791, and Franz Joseph Haydn, 1732 to 1809, introduced virtuosic cadenzas, facilitating an improvised section for soloists, which they grounded on the concerto's melodic themes. While today, performers often play restrained, pre-written cadenzas, in the classical era, improvisation was the norm. Let's listen to a little bit of the first movement of Mozart's Third Violin Concerto performed by Hilary Hahn with the Stuttgart Radio Symphony Orchestra in 2007. Okay, here we go. There's the soloist. Yeah, check out the link. She has such a beautiful tone on the violin. So, and you can also hear her going back and forth between the orchestra and herself. In the late Baroque era, the word sonata could signify any instrumental composition, but in the classical era, the sonata form emerged. The sonata form became the archetypal representation of classical ideals expressed through music. It is far more difficult to identify the form of the sonata than other forms, such as the round, verse, chorus, or ABAC forms. But in general, the sonata form includes a three-part structure: the exposition, development, and recapitulation. As the first key section of the sonata, the exposition presented the musical themes, which were developed throughout the sonata. This was standardized in the classical era into 1, theme 1, in the tonic or home key, 2, transition, modulating to another key, 3, theme 2, which is often more lyrical, and is in a key contrasting with the first, and 4, a closing section which concludes the exposition. In the second key section, the development, composers were more thematically and harmonically daring, varying and exploring musical ideas in novel ways. Tension is often generated by modulating to various keys, by creating contrast, and in a few compositions by introducing polyphony, such as mini fugues, fugal passages, which are brief imitative sections, especially in the sonatas written by Haydn, Mozart, and Ludwig van Beethoven, 1770 to 1827. The final key section of the sonata form was a recapitulation, which resolves tension by bringing the music back home, returning to the two themes introduced in the exposition, but with both being in the tonic. Stability is the conceptual purpose of the recapitulation, and sometimes a coda, a final closing section resolving the sonata's drama, is included. Coda is Italian for tail, which is appropriate in relation to form because the coda comes at the tail end of the movement. Additionally, the classical era saw the refinement of the symphony, a 4-movement, large-scale orchestra composition that defines orchestras to this day. 3 of Pennsylvania's 4 largest orchestras, the Philadelphia Orchestra, the Pittsburgh Symphony, the Harrisburg Symphony Orchestra, and the Allentown Symphony Orchestra, have the word symphony in their ensemble's title. The first movement of the symphony is fast and almost always in sonata form. The second movement is slow and lyrical, juxtaposed with the first. The third movement is either a minuet and trio or a scherzo, both of which point back to the dance forms in which orchestra music is rooted. The final movement of the symphony is either a rondo or, paralleling the first movement, another sonata form. Haydn was known as the father of the symphony. People listen to symphonies today because they are drawn to the expressive depth of this large-scale form, a sort of melodic storytelling, interplaying harmonies and timbres, which carry the listener on an imaginary voyage. Listen to the start of Haydn Symphony No. 104, the London Symphony, performed in 2012 by the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra. What a lovely introduction. Yeah, I tend to pick ones that are a little bit different than the norm, right? Pretty interesting. Okay. Today, roughly 40 to 60% of the repertoire performed by orchestras was composed in the Romantic era, 1820 to 1910. So if you put those two together, that's almost all of what's performed if you go to see an orchestra. In the Romantic era, the symphony evolved dramatically, increasing in length, incorporating more varied music instruments, and engaging in greater emotional range. The average performance duration for a classical era symphony is 20 to 35 minutes. In the Romantic era, the average increased to 40 to 70 minutes. This followed the era's stress on feeling over reason, the internal world of individuals, imagination and the supernatural, nationalism, and the transcendent in dramatic art. The writing of Johann Wolfgang de Goethe, 1739 to 1832, served as a catalyst for the Romantic era standards. Composers like Johannes Brahms, 1833 to 1897, retained classical form but added dynamic weight, while others, such as Franz Liszt, 1811 to 1886, and Gustav Mahler, 1860 to 1911, blurred the boundaries of the sonata form utterly. To exemplify some of the changes, in his Radical Symphonie Fantastique, 1830, Hector Berlioz, 1803 to 1869, added a fifth movement to the four-movement symphony. Increased the orchestra's instrumentation, such as adding an E-flat clarinet in addition to the classic B-flat clarinet, 4 bassoons instead of 2, 2 cornets in addition to the trumpets, and ophicleide, which is an obsolete early instrument that has been replaced by the tuba, a second timpani player, and church bells for the fifth movement's Dies Irae, translated Day of Wrath. This was a Gregorian chant. Let's listen to the fifth movement of Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique, performed in 2020 by the Boston Philharmonic Youth Orchestra. And I've skipped ahead into the third minute, right where that Dies Irae comes in. Bum, 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 bum. Right? It's a very famous melody from Gregorian chant. Pause there. You can hear a little bit of all the changes, right? So this movement, and I apologize for my pronunciation, Songe d'une Nuit du Sabbat, which translates as Dream of the Witch's Sabbath, blends the sacred and grotesque, offering a solemn chant as a dark parody. Berlioz offers a wild, surreal dream of attending one's own funeral, which is attended by witches, fiends, and ghosts. This movement offers a deformation of the resolved theme, a fundamental idea in sonata form in the classical era. Orchestra music in the classical and romantic eras evolved from rational, graceful, and balanced forms into deeply expressive, expansive compositions, shifting from the ideals of the Enlightenment towards the personal, emotional, and imaginative explorations typical in the 19th century.